Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith. This is day 73. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 24 and 25 of the Prima Secundae, that is, of good and evil and the passions of the soul, and of the order of the passions to one another. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code SUMMA10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether moral good and evil can be found in the passions of the soul. If passions had a moral character of themselves, we would have to call dogs and rabbits good or evil because they too have passions. We can almost see on a dog's face the feelings of fear, anger, sorrow just by looking at one. And since we don't consider irrational animals morally good or evil, morality, if it is to be found in the passions, must be found in relation to some other aspect of us, which is the relation of passions to right reason or to the intellect. For we call a human action evil or good, as we described in episode 70, insofar as it departs from or is aligned with right reasoning. Therefore, insofar as a passion flows from one's will at variance or in accord with right reason, then we can call the passion evil or good. In the same way we call our external actions evil or good. However, insofar as a passion or emotion is just something simply elicited in us before our judgment, it is not strictly speaking voluntary and therefore not moral. In Aquinas' words, if then the passions be considered in themselves, to wit, as movements of the irrational appetite, thus there is no moral good or evil in them, since this depends on the reason. If, however, they be considered as subject to the command of the reason and will, then moral good and evil are in them. Article 2, whether every passion of the soul is evil morally. This seems to be the opinion of the Stoics, according to Aquinas, who writes in this article that the Stoics held all passions to be evil. In contrast, St. Thomas's thought on this topic is the following. The Peripatetics, or Aristotle and his company, we could say, give the name of passions to all the movements of the sensitive appetite. Wherefore they esteem them good when they are controlled by reason, and evil when they are not controlled by reason. Article 3, whether passion increases or decreases the goodness or malice of an act. Does the presence of an emotion make a good act better and an evil act worse, or vice versa? And it depends on which side of the judgment of reason, before or after, this particular passion occurs. If the passion comes before, one even notices it, before voluntary judgment, then it lessens the goodness or evil of the subsequent action by placing reason under the sway of passion. And it is because of this influence that we ordinarily consider certain actions less malicious, for example, when done in a fury of passion. But if the emotions come after judgment and result from it, then it can increase the goodness or malice of an act by extending the effect of that internal act even into the sensitive passions, as well as by the intensity of that passion indicating virtue or vice in the soul. On this point, St. Thomas is worth quoting at length. He writes, the passions of the soul may stand in a twofold relation to the judgment of reason. First, antecedently, that means before the judgment of reason, and thus, since they obscure the judgment of reason on which the goodness of the moral act depends, they diminish the goodness of the act. For it is more praiseworthy to do a work of charity from the judgment of reason than from the mere passion of pity. In the second place, consequently, so that's after the judgment of reason, and this in 2 ways. First, by way of redundance, because to wit, when the higher part of the soul is intensely moved to anything, the lower part also follows that movement, and thus the passion that results in consequence in the sensitive appetite is a sign of the intensity of the will, and so indicates greater moral goodness. Secondly, by way of choice, when to wit, a man by the judgment of his reason chooses to be affected by a passion in order to work more promptly with the cooperation of the sensitive appetite. And thus a passion of the soul increases the goodness of an action. Article 4, whether any passion is good or evil in its species. Is any of our emotions good or evil in their kind, simply because of the kind of passion they are? St. Thomas says, moral good and evil can belong to the species of a passion insofar as the object to which a passion tends is of itself in harmony or in discord with reason. Then some of the examples he gives us are shame, which he calls a base fear, and envy, sorrow at another person's good, these emotions as tending towards evil or disordered in the kind of fear and sorrow that they are therefore truly to be said evil in their species or kind. And now on to question 25 of the order of the passions to one another. Article 1, whether the irascible passions precede the concupiscible passions or vice versa. The answer is that the irascible passions arise from and terminate in the concupiscible passions. For we have to love a thing first before we can hope for it, or fear its loss, or struggle for it in daring or anger. Thus the concupiscible passions of love and hate must precede those of the irascible. But the concupiscible passions must also follow the irascible, because we don't fight for something or hope for something simply for the sake of anger or hope, but for joy, to rest in the good for which we are struggling for. And since joy and sorrow are the passions of rest in the perceived good and evil, from this perspective also it is clear that they should inevitably come after the irascible passions as their final end. Therefore it is true, as St. Thomas holds, that the irascible passions arise from and terminate in the concupiscible passions. Article 2, whether love is the first of the concupiscible passions. What is love? Which we will discuss at length in our next episode, but here we get what might seem to be a surprising definition from Aquinas. He writes, whatever tends to an end has, in the first place, an aptitude or proportion to that end, for nothing tends to a disproportionate end. And this very aptitude or proportion of the appetite to good is love, which is complacency in good. So love is a complacency in the good, which is a surprising definition because complacency in the good is what we would expect joy to be. Therefore, almost preempting our concerns, St. Thomas continues, writing, the union of lover and beloved is twofold. There is real union, consisting in the conjunction of one with the other. This union belongs to joy, or pleasure, which follows desire. There is also an affective union, consisting in an aptitude or proportion, insofar as one thing, from the very fact of its having an aptitude for and an inclination to another, partakes of it, and love betokens such a union. So in the sense that ends or goals must exist in the beginning, in some way, in order for one to pursue that end or goal, then this affective union of love must come first before any other passion can follow it. So in the order of execution or attainment of the good, love is first, then desire, then joy. Moreover, since good comes before any privation of the good, then love must also precede hatred and those emotions which will follow from it. So St. Thomas concludes, Augustine says that all the passions are caused by love, since love yearning for the beloved object is desire, and having and enjoying it is joy. Therefore love is the first of the concupiscible passions. Article 3, whether hope is the first of the irascible passions. Because hope is directed to the possible good, which is then the reason for our courage or anger against the evils opposed to it, as well as the fear of losing it or despair over it, it is clear that hope must be the first of the irascible passions, and on account of its object, the arduous good, which is most directly related to it, kind of like love is most directly related to the good in the concupiscible passions. St. Thomas then gives us a kind of summary of this order of the passions in writing, "If we wish to know the order of all the passions in the way of generation, love and hatred are first, desire and aversion second, hope and despair third, fear and daring fourth, anger fifth, sixth and last, joy and sadness, which follow from all the passions. Yet so that love precedes hatred, desire precedes aversion, hope precedes despair, fear precedes daring, and joy precedes sadness, as may be gathered from what has been stated already." Article 4, whether those are the four principal passions, joy, sadness, hope, and fear. What St. Thomas means by principal passions in this article are those which are the last end of all the passions taken as a whole and in the present, which is joy or sadness, as well as those passions which are last, but when the good or evil is still considered as pertaining to the future, which is hope and fear, since hope is the passion of approach toward the possible arduous good, and fear is withdrawal from the corresponding possible evil. And then he will admit, though fear and hope are not the last passions simply, yet they are the last of those passions that tend towards something as future. And for a more lengthy discussion about why Aquinas chose hope and fear over daring and anger, I will refer the listener to the text. But in his words, as a kind of summary of this article, St. Thomas writes, "Hence it is customary to distinguish these four passions in relation to the present and the future. For movement regards the future, while rest is something in the present, so that joy relates to present good, sadness relates to present evil, hope regards future good, and fear, future evil." And that is all for questions 24 and 25 of the Prima Secundae, that is, of good and evil and the passions of the soul, and of the order of the passions to one another. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.